Hi, welcome to a new episode of Ask Ralph and Lonnie. I'm Lonnie.
And I'm Ralph. And this episode is all about a part of our work that people oftentimes don't know about, and yet when they do find out about it, they ask, well, what do you actually do? And it's funny because it's one of the things that we've done probably longest of all the different things that we do, isn't it?
Well, and it seems like we do a lot of different things, but what we're going to try to explain today is how we integrate all those things and that they're all sort of parts of a whole.
Right.
So we've been astrologers for, I'll admit to 40 years, maybe?
Yeah, more than 40 years.
Yeah.
More than 40 years.
And when we lived on the East Coast, we taught a feng shui certification program that we call Ergonomic and Environmental Design. And of course, we're naturopathic doctors and master herbalists. So these things seem like they're all very different and would take all kinds of our time and dedication and interest. But of course, they're all involved with one unifying theme, and that is wellness and lifestyle as it is explained by an astrological chart, by the food that you eat, the supplements that you take, and the environment around you.
What's funny is that historically, professionals in this type of field had multiple skills. For instance, among the Druids actually had multiple skills as both astrologers and herbalists and singers and poets and historians and attorneys.
I think we should start singing and writing poetry.
And practicing law.
There you go.
No, wait a second. And then if you go back into ancient China, typically feng shui practitioners were also physicians, which meant they were essentially herbalists. I remember one time we were speaking at a large feng shui conference. In fact, we spoke at every single major feng shui conference for 10 years, a number of years ago, when we were still traveling a great deal.
When we didn't want to leave California, once we moved here,
Yes.
we were very happy to stay closer to home.
Exactly. And I remember that there was a practitioner, a very well renowned practitioner from China, saying, how many people here are physicians? And there was 200 or 300 people in the room, and I could swear ours were the only hands that went up. We were practically the only physicians in the room. But he thought you should all be physicians. Well, we were doing our best, weren't we? We were doing our best, because the way in which your environment affects us is affecting your body. It's impacting your health. It's impacting your psychology. The way in which the planets create you as a child, you might say, the pattern they imprint upon you is going to be there for your entire life.
And then by transits, they reprogram
Right.
you or remind you of your original
Yes.
program. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not so easy. Sometimes you need to go back and do your homework over. But, it's very interesting how all these things integrate together. And I know that in our feng shui work, so many times we have said this phrase, first you change your environment and then your environment changes you. Well, it's really the same in the body. When you change the environment in your body, suddenly your health is changed. It's just something as simple as acid or alkaline. Getting enough protein in your diet or whatever will make remarkable changes in the way that you think, the way that you view life, the way that you approach life, and your level of health and vitality.
Of course, the thing that drives all astrologers crazy is the sun sign columns, because most people think of that as astrology. In truth, that whole concept of the sun sign is a relatively recent invention going back to about the 1800s. Before then, people would never describe themselves as a Virgo or a Leo or as a Scorpio. They wouldn't think of it in those terms. Astrologers were employed for more analytical purposes. Even one like Newton. Newton is one of the giants of science. His degrees from university were in astrology and alchemy being chemistry, but the other part of it being astrology. Astrology for a long time was known as the queen of the sciences, and in fact was taught in university all the way up into the early 1900s.
The science that we now call astronomy came out of astrology, not the other way around. So it's not as though people took parts of astronomy and wanted to apply it as sort of a hobby or something like that. The original observations were done by astrologers to determine timing, of cycles on the planet for planting, for planning. There are some differences. They look at, they don't go to the tropical, they stay with the sidereal zodiac, which is kind of a technical way of explaining what has happened because of the tilt of the earth and what's called precession of the equinoxes, but precession of the equinoxes. But it's just that the stars and planets that we're looking at are in a different position now than they were with respect to the earth thousands of years ago.
And yet we use the tropical zodiac, as do you, every time you look at your watch or you look at a calendar, because the calendar that we count from the first day of spring is based upon the tropical zodiac that's common in Western astrology. Indian astrology uses the sidereal zodiac.
And that's why we haven't changed it in the Western world, because we still want Aries to be the first day of spring.
Yes.
And we still want, all of our seasons we don't want them to change by 22 and a half days. So.
Yeah, and there's very practical reasons for it, because we live in a vibrant, interconnected world in which, as we know from watching the Weather Channel, nature affects us all the time. You see these great satellite maps, and this is where are these energies coming from? They're coming from the spinning of the globe, they're coming from sunspots, they're coming from lunar cycles, and of course they're being affected by the major planets. The sun itself actually rotates or it swings in space like this as it travels. What's that being caused by? It's being caused by the motions primarily of Jupiter and Saturn pulling the sun around. Well,
now who's getting technical?
Figure it this way, if Jupiter and Saturn can pull the sun around, what do you think it's doing to you?
That's true. And getting back to your idea about nature, of course, the idea of feng shui is that feng shui means wind and water, and these are elemental forces that literally shape the earth. And so they shape our lives because we're adjusting to weather patterns and, so these things are very important in considering the whole life of a person, a whole person's existence, and all the various parts that contribute to the overall mental and physical health and well-being of a person. And that's what integrates all of the studies that we share with people.
In fact, I think that of the different things we do, one of the things is health astrology, which I think happens to be Lonnie's favorite, because it really helps you get a picture of what a person is about. What's their personality? What is their nature? What are the
It's
kind
a
of
map
personality?
to a healthy person.
Exactly. It's the wiring diagram of that being, you might say. And so if it's a person who has a very strong Mars, for instance, well, it's not that they need exercise. It's that if you don't let them exercise, they're going to die. It's that simple. They're the kind of person
He's a little dramatic.
They need a lot of physical activity,
Well, they thrive on it. If they don't get it, they're going to suffer in some way, because that's just the way that they're hardwired. Other people, are ruled by Mercury or have a strong Mercury in their chart, which means they have a lot of mental stuff going on. They need to be stimulated mentally, and or they need to talk and communicate. So there's a lot of things that you can get by looking at a chart that really kind of maps out what that person's intention was, in choosing that chart, in choosing that time to be born.
Well, in fact, recently we just had a client who contacted us because they were creating they want two charts for young people going off to college, and they wanted a sense of what should be the pathway. They were going to college. They really didn't know why. They didn't know what their life path should be. And one of the things that astrologers have worked on for a long time is consulting with people, looking at that wiring diagram and say, what are you wired for?
So I think what you're trying to say is that we provide a practical outlet for parents who don't want to spend extra money while their child changes their major 7 times before they discover what they really were meant to do.
Exactly. In fact, if you want to here's a little feng shui trick. If you want to save yourself a lot of money, when your child is in school, if they're going to school from home, like in college, don't let them change bedrooms. Don't let them shift bedrooms. Or if they're going to, be housed someplace at school, try to get that same place for all 4 years. Because when you change the doorway of a room, you move to a different space, you change the program. And many times we've seen people where the child was, in school for one program, then their other sibling moved out and they changed rooms and they ended up changing majors. Well, you know how expensive that is these days? So to avoid that, spend the money on housing and don't spend it on tuition, okay?
Another interesting part of our work is locational astrology. And we do that again also on a personal level and on a larger level. So if we're working with a company who is anticipating a relationship working with a company that is located in another state or even in another country, we can look at the locational lines and see whether or not they're going to have a benefit or a harmonious relationship with them based on astrocartography or local space lines. And in terms of personal life, it's fun when we get to do interesting things like relocate a person to a new city and maybe a new state, and then tell them which direction to drive to find their new dry cleaner or hairdresser. So
or romantic possibilities.
When we say mundane astrology, it can get pretty mundane.
Right. And it's funny because if you go back historically again, the oldest stone markings on the planet, other than, of the civilized eras, are actually these astrological markings, oftentimes from planetary markings where they were laying out land and they were using planetary lines. They were using their sightings on the rising sun or the setting sun in order to line up these properties. In fact, a lot of the early math that was developed in Greece and in Egypt was for surveying, but they always surveyed related to the planets. This was an important part of it. Later on, navigation. Navigation, of course, is all based upon, looking at the sky, because when you're out to sea, you got a compass and you've got the stars. That's pretty much it. So this is, people forget how much numbers matter. Today, you pull your phone out and you look at your GPS. Well, before GPS, it was navigation, and that was why it was so important for countries to support their astronomers and astrologers, because they were the ones that allowed their navies to function. I'll tell you one thing that's very interesting. In case you think that astrologers are kind of all been sidelined these days, every year they do the analysis of how much people make in each one of the professions. Astrologers make more than astronomers, and they make almost twice as much as astronomers do. It's actually a very nice profession.
Oops.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's interesting to note that I don't know what the year was, but until a certain point in time, astrology was a college course.
Yes.
And it was actually required in medical school.
Yep.
And there's a part of astrology that's called horary, which means of the hour, where people can ask a question and get an answer based on where the planets are at the moment they form that question in their mind. But beyond that, just simple things like the cycles of the moon and which cycle of the moon would be the best or the worst to undergo elective surgery, because, especially women are connected to their own moon cycle, and so they realize that it might be more likely that you'd have excess bleeding at a certain time of the lunar cycle, and maybe it's better that you can postpone elective surgery to another time. So that's another interesting aspect of the correlation between natural health or health and the astrology as well.
Of course, we've really ignored like the two elephants in the room, which is the main two reasons why people have always come to astrologers. It's either love and money,
or it's money
and love. In fact, we saw a really interesting manifestation there for a bunch of years, where for years the women would all come wanting to know about love, relationships, and the men would want to come and know about, business, my career. And then as each of them were leaving and practically putting their coats on, they would kind of turn around and the men would say, well, what about my love life? And the girls would say, what about my career? And then someplace...
We found at a certain point in time, it just completely reversed. And the women are like, love, schmov, tell me about money. Money and career, that's all I'm concerned about. But over their shoulder, they might throw a, okay, what about that love thing?
And then guys would say, no, I really need a relationship. Tell me, we'd spend, most of the time on relationships, and as we were finishing saying, oh, am I in the right career? But it was really a funny shift.
And we say to them, we have herbs for that too.
Yes,
Just
yes.
take a little kava. It'll make you more social, and maybe
Exactly.
you'll actually go out and meet somebody instead of waiting for them to like jump in the window. And
Exactly. For the men, take a little sarsaparilla and kind of get that sparkle back in your eye.
Exactly.
For women, a little, natural
Kumquat,
progesterone or wild yam to kind of get their, make them feel just
attractive and engaged and in the world,
Right. So
we
it's
have a lot of people who are hiding out these days because of insecurity or pain or ill health or anxiety or so many reasons, and a lot of them are dietary related. Some of them are transit related, and some of them are astrocartography related.
Exactly.
So we can really look at everything and say, really point people in the right direction.
In fact, that was one of the reasons why I think we really started expanding into herbs was, when you're doing an astrological consultation at this level, and this is not fortune telling, but there are fortune tellers out there, and there's gypsies out there, and there's, all the different types of things that are, scams.
And there are astrologers who work intuitively,
Right,
but that's not what we are, and
No.
that's not what we do. We just the facts. Who's that? Joe Friday on Dragnet or something?
Right.
Just the
That's
facts.
It's high level astrology is really, people used to say it's number crunching. Well, it goes beyond number crunching. It's into understanding.
it
It's
pretty much
understanding
is.
people, but it starts at the numbers. You're always looking at the chart. You're looking at the numbers first. I mean, I was in a situation the other day, and I was working on actually a TV project for our TV show Wine Country at Work, and I was talking about the owner of a winery to someone else who works there, and I've never met the owner, but I happen to know their chart, which is kind of funny. I happen to know their birth date, and I started describing them in terms of, well, this is why they act like that. I said, but I could be wrong. I've never met the person. I said, oh, no, you're exactly right. Oh, my gosh, you're like exactly right. Well, in truth, what I was doing was relatively simple. I was looking at 3 or 4 major indicators: the sun, the moon position, the Mars, the Mercury positions. But that's where a lot of stuff happens. And they were just like, how did you? Well, that's the chart. That's just their wiring program. Of course, they're going to play out like that. And, it does give you a wonderful insight. Of course, when you have that kind of insight, it's important to be very ethical about it. And that's what I was saying about fortune telling, which is, a lot of fortune telling. When you walk into a space and they start telling you everything right up front before asking you anything, always be a little cautious, unless they're a psychic. A psychic works in a different ways. With an astrologer, we would look at the chart, and we could spend half the time just listening to the person. We would tell them something from the chart and then listen and really find out, we have the whole wiring diagram. What do you want to do with this?
Exactly. You look at a chart and it might mean something different in manifesting in one person's life, because there is this thing called free will.
Yeah.
We make choices. A lot of what we do, we describe as giving you the astrological weather forecast, and then you have to decide whether or not you're going to carry the umbrella.
Right.
It doesn't mean that these indicators that we look at and comment about are necessarily going to come to pass. You have to participate with it. And another aspect of astrology that a lot of people aren't aware of is that, if you have a planet, people say, oh, I've got a really bad moon position. I know it's really terrible, or my sun position is really screwed, or whatever like that. You get to pick what planet in your chart you want to filter your life through. And you can change that at any time. You say, okay, my Mars isn't doing so well, and right now it's doing even worse because of the transits that are here. I'm going to just live my life through my Venus, and
eat chocolate.
I'll come back to Mars. Yeah, exactly. I'll take a more relaxed approach, which is a Venusian approach. I'll take a let it come to me approach instead of force it to happen approach, which would have been the Mars.
Yes.
Exactly. And so you can just, this brings me to one of the reasons that I was so interested in studying astrology at a young age. My first child was 2. And so I myself was born a twin and then had twins. And it occurred to me very early on that if two people had essentially the same chart, in my case within 6 minutes, in the case of my twins within 2 minutes of each other, how can they in fact be very different as they are? And so that's what led me to look at astrology and really want to study it. And a sort of subset of that is that I'm fascinated with the charts of twins, because you really, it's the choices that you make that really show the person how they're using that chart. It's still the same chart or a similar chart or essentially the same chart, but you're using it in different ways, you know?
And there is that difference of a couple of minutes, because the chart keeps shifting. In fact, even in your twins' charts, there's actually differences between the two charts.
There are slight differences, but they're found mostly in something called the Sabian symbols, which is a very interesting thing in the part of fortune.
And the two twins' lives have had a lot of similarities, but there's definitely been some kind of symbolic differences that have really played out that show up in these Sabian symbols.
Well, they've clearly chosen different planets at different times. It doesn't mean that later on in life they don't decide to do the planet that the other one did and end up at the same place.
Exactly.
So it's a very interesting study, and it gives you a lot of insight and compassion into people, and it really gives you some very practical tools in order to help them and validate them. There's a concept in the chart called rising planets, and when the first houses contain planets that are not visible by the naked eye, you need a telescope for you to see those actual planets. Very often those people are misunderstood throughout their life, because just like you can't see those planets without a telescope, people that they meet don't really see those qualities in them until they get to know them longer, or they get to a certain point in their life and they start talking about these things that they have never been validated for. So a lot of what we do is just validating the person's experience, not just through their chart and their transits, but through the map of their feng shui and their... A lot of times they create the same chaos that they grew up with, or the comfort that they grew up with in their space. I remember I moved from a home into an apartment, and my daughter came to visit, and she went directly in the kitchen to every single thing. She knew where the forks were, she knew where the plates were, she knew where the skillet was. And I said, how do you know where all those things are? You weren't here when I was moving and putting these things away. She says, well, it's just logical for you. I mean, that's where you put things. And it's true. We do these things by habit. And then once we point out that, well, maybe you're shooting yourself in the foot, you can learn new ways of approaching life that are bigger and more important in your life than forks and dishes.
You know, you said something very interesting, that we spend really the first half of the session with people validating who they are. You know, for instance, and you were mentioning about the rising planets, it means what is the planet on the eastern horizon when the person's born? And there's a series of might be a series of planets there. Well, if it's Uranus you cannot see without the telescope, or Pluto, that planet will be very important to how you experience the world, but other people won't understand it or see it unless they know you really well. You know, and that's very helpful for people to realize that, oh, now I get it. I have this eccentric personality, which someone with Uranus rising would tend to have, but other people just don't get it. They just don't see it. They think of me as being very, you know, traditional. But in truth, their point of view on the world is very alternative. In the second part of the consultations, we get to the what now stage. And that's where we started really helping people with herbs. Was because we would say, you know, it's really helpful to know that you are someone who, for example, has a very, very hot nervous system. You know, maybe they have Mercury conjunct Uranus in their chart, and their nervous system just runs zzz. It's like they're getting lightning bolts through the sky into their head all the time. Well, this may explain why you're always up to 3 o'clock in the morning. Why can't I sleep? Well, this is why.
Or why a watch doesn't work on your wrist. I mean, really mundane things.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? Maybe some kava kava will help you out. Maybe some 5-HTP will help you out. Maybe some GABA will help you out. Maybe more essential fatty acids will help calm down that nervous system. You know, you don't want to validate the person's life, then say, oh, but you got a problem, see you next week, you know, or see you next year. You want to say, this is what's going on with you. Here's some tools that will help you fix that. For instance, with the Uranus rising, you know, guess what? You could bet money that next to that person's bed is an electric alarm clock, probably their cell phone on the other side, and maybe the fax machine underneath the bed. Well, they're so awash in electromagnetic fields while they're sleeping.
And because that's a configuration in their natal chart, they think that's the way it's supposed to be. It feels normal, but that doesn't mean it feels comfortable.
Right. And so they're burning through all of their essential fatty acids all the time. They're burning through all their vitamin C. They're burning through all their pantothenic acid, vitamin B5. Zip, just right through their system.
We did a great beginner's workshop on feng shui for a long time on the East Coast. And we would do our workshop, and people who were attending would bring a diagram of one room. And we realized that doing one room is not like doing a whole house or your work environment. We asked them to choose the room that was problematic. Don't give me your favorite room in the house. Give me the one that doesn't work. You know, the living room that people won't sit in, the kitchen that nobody eats in, the bedroom that you can't sleep in. And we'll give you 4 or 5 things to do in order to improve your experience in that space. And we would always give them 3, 4, 5 things to do, but we would always end up giving them some herbs, because that way they can transition through the changes. You know, you mentioned magnesium. Magnesium is kind of like the para todo, you know, supplement that just about everybody needs, because it does so much, because it really relaxes you. You know, when you've got that stiff neck, you know, magnesium. When you're having trouble breathing, you're asthmatic, you have to relax the spasm, magnesium. When you have a migraine, magnesium. Heart palpitations, magnesium. Constipation, magnesium. So, you know, there's always something that you can recommend to people to make their life easier and better very dramatically, so that they have confidence in all the other changes that they're going to make, because some of the changes are hard. Right.
And this is why sometimes women would say, oh, you know, I can't sleep. My husband sleeps fine. We would look at the 2 charts and say, no wonder he sleeps fine. But no wonder you don't, because the 2 charts were very different.
He's got a Neptune line in the bedroom, and you've got a Mars line in the bedroom.
You know, and the thing is that they're complementary personalities. You know, we don't marry people who are just like us. We marry people who are complementary to us.
Right.
So that's why it would work for him, maybe not work for her. It doesn't mean we couldn't make it work for her by changing the room around a lot.
Exactly.
He was going to sleep no matter what, you know.
So we hope that answers your question about how we do so many different things. They're really all different aspects of the same thing: healthy life and lifestyle.
Exactly. If you'd like to see more episodes, go to spaceandtime.com. And hopefully this has given you some insights into what astrologers do in the modern world. Until next time, I'm Ralph.
And I'm Lonnie.
This is Ask Ralph and Lonnie.